Welcome to Victoria Rumble Room, a show that endeavors to bring you some of the bigger stories on Vancouver Island, British Columbia, Canada, the wide, wide world. And I'm Robin Adair, and I'm speaking to you from the lovely, sunny suburb of Esquimalt. That's part of Greater Victoria. And even greater across town is that magic kingdom called Saanich. And within that realm is my partner in crime, John Jurisic, the Croatian sensation. And John, great to have another crack at the Rumble Room.
There will never be a moment that I can ever get close to your introductions. I just love them. Thank you. Oh, man, yet again, an avalanche of issues to discuss, Robbins. Yet again, everything from new doctor's agreement and an alarm bell being rung for those that want to hear it. That being, is there enough workforce housing coming out of these new councils from across Vancouver Island? But perhaps we should start a little bit with some of the feedback we've received about our coverage of the protests in Iran. We really appreciate all the people writing in and commenting. We really do. And so thank you. And we're gonna talk about a few of those. And we're going to dig into international stories and women being treated unfairly and launching a nationwide protest, everything that grabs our attention, of which there are numerous things. Look at these young ladies at a conservative university in Tehran this week, knocking down a barrier between the women's eating area and the place where men can sit to eat.
Last week, we had Cheryl Thomas on the show. Cheryl taught MBA students for 8 years in Iran and is well-versed in what's going on in that country where right now, if you don't wear your clothing in a certain way, if you're a woman and you don't wear your headscarf properly, you show too much hair, you can be dragged off to jail. You can be beaten. You can be killed. And it's terrible behavior. And we thought it was very important that people knew exactly what was going on and how Islamic law is being unfairly used. And, we've received some viewer mail about this, John, and it hasn't been very positive. Walt writes us, what a load of hypocritical bullshit. If they really cared about Iranian women, they'd be demanding the removal of crippling sanctions. So shut up, you reactionary, neoliberal, imperialist loudmouth.
You know, the comments we get on social media are just, wow. Anyway.
They're precious. They're precious, John.
Very precious. Certainly makes you think about and go, Scott also expresses a very direct opinion. We have no right to tell any other country to do anything.
And Linda says, what about the plight of Canadians? Well, Linda, hundreds of thousands of Iranian Canadians and Canadians who stand by Iran and what's going on there are very concerned about this. We feel a responsibility to share some of these bigger issues that are really planetary issues. They're deals that we should all be thinking about, no matter where you live in the world. It concerns all of us in the way, especially the way women are being treated. And we do have, however, a very big story on the plight of Canadians. And John, it's around the doctors.
Yeah, Robin, that's right. Increasingly across the country, Canadians can't find a family doctor. With the baby boomers aging and with so many doctors walking away from family practices, we have a crisis on our hands, particularly in BC. Here, 1 in 5 folks don't have a family physician. That's terrible. Something had to be done. And finally, action has been taken.
There's been a seismic shift in British Columbia, and that's been the headline right across the province and right across the country. National newspapers are picking up on this. And it is an optional move away from the fee-from-service model And here are a few of the highlights. Doctors will now be paid for time spent with a patient with no limit on diagnostic topics.
The base salary is up to $385,000 from $250,000 for a full-time doctor.
And more will be paid for longer hours, larger patient rosters, and for after-hours services, including paperwork.
BC Healthcare Matters, a group that we've had on our show many times, has been a grassroots movement that has lobbied long and hard for these changes. Victoria's Camille Currie got this organization started, and she's encouraged that this is an important first step, that this is an important first step to solve the doctor shortage.
And so I expect this will lead to more people and more doctors practicing for longer, so existing doctors being stabilized in their practices and attracting new people.
There was a lot of information. It was very complex, but my general takeaway from it was that this is really great. This is really transformational. I think that, there's two sides to it. There's the family physician and how's it affecting them, and then there's the patient side. And what I really liked was that this new compensation model does seem to put an equal amount of focus on bringing forward what patients need. So what patients need is to be able to talk to their doctor about all the things that are happening that day. And they need to be able to not feel that they have a 15-minute clock on them. Those are really important things that we've heard lots of people talk about. And this compensation model helps address that. It helps compensate family physicians in an equitable fashion and will help relieve some of that stress on patients.
What I'm hoping is this new payment model is the anchoring, is the foundation to create the condition in which our patients can get the best type of quality care that they deserve. We need healthcare equity across the province, and we also understand that our rural and remote communities, their needs need to be met. I've met with many of our communities across the province, and what I can tell you is that rural and remote voice is always at our table as well at Doctors of BC. So whatever we are building, our hope is that the new future is upon us, and this transformational change will have the needs of everyone.
Last weekend, Dr. Jennifer Lush was asked about the idea of foreign doctors coming, and she said foreign doctors won't come to BC unless they can see that BC doctors actually want to practice family medicine here. And I guess the minister was kind of intimating that. He was asked pointedly about how does this help the doctor situation right now, and he mentioned foreign doctors, but he kind of mentioned it in that context.
Yeah, absolutely. I got asked that today as well, in the context of, well, how is this going to help the 1 million that still don't have a family doctor? And my response to that is that I believe that this new compensation model does now allow us to move on to step 2, step 3, step 4. And some of those steps include easing, bringing in foreign trained medical professionals. It also opens up the avenue to getting more BC family physicians actually practicing family medicine in communities. We know that almost half of our family physician licensed physicians are not working in community practice right now. So I see this as a huge positive, that there is the potential here that we may be able to actually finally encourage some of our own doctors back into practice, and also now, attract foreign doctors, attract doctors from other provinces, and that's how we'll end up helping the 1 million.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. What do we want? Doctors! What do we want? Doctors! Now!
So in a way, what this is a great first step, but there's so many steps ahead. So I gather that BC Healthcare Matters isn't going anywhere for the foreseeable future.
Absolutely. I think that BC Healthcare Matters has played an incredibly pivotal part on us being able to get to today's announcement. And I want everyone to know that they played a part with their advocacy to get us to here, but we're not going to let up. None of us can let up, because this is only step 1 and we need to keep going. We need to make sure the 1 million get that access available. We need to make sure our hospitals are taken care of, that our ERs aren't inundated with patients for primary care needs. So we still have a long ways to go, and we're ready to keep going.
So, well done, BC government. Well done, Doctors of BC. And congratulations to Camille Currie and her group, who've worked so hard to improve the system. It's really remarkable. Lobbying and communications. However, the story isn't over, Robin. It certainly has opened an encouraging new chapter, of which we think there are many more. However,
Absolutely, there are, John, and we're going to talk a lot about that, but we're going to also talk on this show now about something new, something completely different. Actually, it's an addendum to what we've been talking about the last few shows, and that's been the outfall of the civic election. 37 mayors across British Columbia lost their jobs, and we've had whole councils rejigged because of anti-development feelings across the province. And certainly, we all like to have our quality of life, and there's a growing demand for housing out there. People have to live somewhere, and we love the idea of Victoria becoming a high-tech hub. And really cool jobs everywhere and people staying here and staying close to home. But how do they do that? And how do we keep our best and brightest here if they can't afford to live here?
Al Smith is the executive director of the Peninsula Chamber of Commerce, and he's very concerned about the housing crunch for our workforce. It's getting to the point where people are turning down good jobs because of the cost of living. Essential jobs because it costs too much to live here. It's the same issue across the province and in many places across the country. So let's zoom in, Al Smith. And now joining us in the Victoria Rumble Room for the first time is a gentleman that I've worked with all across the region and on so many levels for many years. He looks young. I do not look young. So I don't know what the hell happened in the meantime. Al Smith, great that you're joining us today.
Awesome, thanks. It's fun to be here. I'm not as old as you may think I am. I don't know if
No,
the gray hair fools everyone. I went gray when I was like 30.
I see. Hey, right off the top, let's talk about what I think is the preeminent issue, business and personal issue in the region, and that is workforce housing. But, the question becomes a bit of a definition. Who are we talking about? Who are we not talking about when we're talking about these issues? Just so everyone listening and viewing understands, when we talk about workforce housing, we're actually not talking about the unemployed. And we're not talking about, I would suggest, the reasonably comfortable middle class. So how would you describe this sector, please, for our, at this stage, bazillion viewers?
Like for me, I think the workforce housing is anyone employed. Like if we have to like nail it into a genre, like an area, I would say it's our workforce. Whoever has a job needs a place to live. And I think that's what we mean as a chamber, or myself, when I talk about workforce housing. It's really like you have a job, you need to live. And I think that, so to put it very clear, that's what I mean when I say workforce housing is our employees, our staff, our entrepreneurs, everyone. That's who I mean. The people who are in that working age that the government says is 15 to 64, which we know it's a lot more here. It expands past 64 here. But I would just say in any region, workforce housing is the people who are working and need a place to live.
Okay, fantastic. And, this access to such housing, especially for working people, is just getting tougher and tougher, if not impossible now.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It's a developing issue. And the more, as you know, John, I took this post at the Chamber of Commerce out on the Saanich Peninsula to kind of help set the tone for it and the direction for it for the next however long. And my background has been a lot of startups, a lot of building up companies and selling companies, a lot of turnaround CEO work, turnaround chief technology officer work. And then I do a whole lot of mentoring of entrepreneurs along the way too. I have like 5 spots I keep open all year. And so I have a pretty good understanding of what's happening in the business community locally and provincially and even a little bit across Canada. So it's become a massive issue going forward. And we can dive into more of those stats.
I'm very interested in this, and Al, great to have you on the show. We've been looking forward to having you on for a while now. So this was great that you had the time for this important topic. And it's important in some ways because it reflects what's been discussed over the last couple of months during the civic election. This was one of the big issues, was the fact that there isn't enough social housing and there isn't enough workforce housing being built. And we've just heard from Matt Dell, who's just been newly elected in Victoria, talking about the fact that Victoria itself is building more of this housing than, say, even Langford is. But it's a question of what type of housing it is and who it's for and how that works. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on that. And of course, we'll expand from there. But are you happy about the housing that is being built across the region? And does it fit the need in terms of people who are in the workforce?
Absolutely not happy. I think that, I mean, you guys know I grew up here. This has been my home since I was 2. And from the day that I graduated university 30 years ago, just to give you a perspective on that, the housing issue has been a growing issue like my entire time living here. And I think most of my grad class had to move away even in 1990 to be able to afford to live or like get into those entry level positions and stuff like that. So absolutely not happy. And I think the type of housing is an interesting one, right? Because I think on top of what we need, there's a demographic shift in the workforce that's been happening here in Greater Victoria and especially on the peninsula, that the big, huge chunk of the workforce is now hitting that retirement age, kind of that boomer generation and kind of around that and either side of that, that stayed in the workforce a lot later, right, is now starting to move out. They stayed past 65, a lot of them, right? So what that's meant is if you look at the shape, the demographic curve for the workforce, just if you take our current population and you shift it down, we're going to lose about 20% of our workforce over the next 10 years. That's a significant shift. And I think people aren't really, I mean, every report I've read back to 2001 talked about it, but no one's done anything about it. I think that's the big challenge we're under right now is this housing debate, and all these numbers have been tossed around for years with no real solution to it. So, but on the kind of housing we need with that shift into a younger workforce, and I'm kind of a Gen Xer, right? So I'm the beginning of that kind of next layer of workforce. I'll be the guy replacing kind of an older CEO or an older chief technology officer, an older someone, as I move through my career, which isn't over yet. I just turned 50. I've got lots of life left in me. I think that what you're seeing is a desire to spend a lot less, because there isn't, the cost of living is so much higher. So in that under the boomer generation workforce that is going to be what we're reliant on, there's a level of desire to live as close to work as you can. We care a lot more about like the quality of our lives and less time commuting and that sort of thing. And then if you go even younger in that kind of category of the 50 to 65, they don't have cars. They want to rely on public transit and active transportation systems and things like that, which means that the way that over the last 30 years of my life that Victoria has solved the housing gap is by forcing people farther and farther away from the hub to afford to live. And then they have these big commutes and things like that. And I think that strategy is now useless. I think we're at the end of that, which is why we're talking housing crisis, I think. So the type of housing I think that needs to happen is as close to work as possible.
So this pretty dire situation we've painted here. Let's begin to look at how this can be solved, if at all. There's been some initiative at the provincial level. Our new Premier, David Eby, recently, the housing minister talked about taking away the power of municipalities to block development, especially rental development. So you can imagine the shockwaves that this sent through to North Saanich, Metchosin, where all development is frowned upon and continues to be. So do you think the BC government will follow through and force housing projects in communities that don't want it?
Wow, and this is a hard one. Municipalities are only given their abilities by the province. Like they serve at the grace of the province, basically, right? They're given these abilities to make these decisions for bylaws and zoning and stuff by the province. So do I think that the province could step in? 100% they can. Do I think they should? I do, because 30 years of not building enough supply has led to it's a simple supply and demand equation for us as business guys, right? Like they've been stifling supply for longer than I've been alive, and therefore the demand has only increased. And so that's going to lead to a natural ramping of pricing, right? And so do I think the province needs to step in? Absolutely, I do. Do I think that the what they've proposed is the ultimate solution? Not necessarily, because it's kind of like a blanket wiping solution. And I think we should be focused on building density around transit lines. I think that's kind of the key messaging that I think needs to happen. Whereas they're basically saying, hey, anyone with an acre plus, go ahead, throw a whole bunch of people on it. Right. So I sometimes you need to have a blanket thing to solve an age-old problem. So I both appreciate and am leery about the province's statement at the same time, right? I think we definitely need housing, and though I think that it would be great if we could figure out how to do it with density. And the municipalities, though, have been given the opportunity to do that for the last 3 decades and haven't. So I get that the provincial government is like, well, we got to make some decisions that go across everything. And so I both understand it and wish that the municipalities hadn't put us in this position historically. Ebby might go, great, here it is. But then North Saanich could slap so many bylaws on it that builders just don't want to build, or that it's impossible for you to get your permits or anything like, which they already kind of do. Yeah. So Ebby's idea is really only one slate, and it's not going to take effect until all the bylaws are brought up along with it, right? To build and to get your building permits. And there are people who have been waiting for well over a year, almost 2 or 3 for building permits, and sitting on land that's costing them money the entire time they're doing it. So there's other ways that municipalities can get in the way. And I think the only way around this is to raise up the silent majority of voters to start putting in councils in the next election. So we've got 4 years to get super vocal with residents on, oh my gosh, let's solve this, or you're going to have nowhere to live. Your kids aren't going to be able to live here. I'm preparing a talk for our members right now. I think we're going to do in December. I think we're going to start advertising it next week. So you hear it her first, whatever. But it's all about how to prepare for the coming 30% increase in staffing costs over the next 3 years. Like, our businesses need to know that all of this stuff is getting to the point now where you have to pay more, because all the residents are like, just pay them more. Great. We're going to pay them more. It's going to increase our costs just in staffing alone by 30%, just over 30%. We're just going to pass that back to the residents. So it's going to get more expensive even to live other than that. But businesses need to be aware that, hey, this is coming and we're all in this together. And if you don't pass those costs off, you're going to fail, because your profit margins are going to drop to the point where you can't even afford to run the company.
So interesting to hear from Al Smith. Just a ton of information. He represents a business voice concerned about the welfare of the business community, and equally our wider community.
Absolutely. We'll definitely have him back. And we're going to talk a lot more, I'm sure, about housing in the near future, because it affects so many of us and our families and our future. And John, we're getting close to the end, but I did want to mention that next week we're going to have a special Remembrance Day program. Retired Lieutenant Colonel Jamie Hammond will be with us to talk about his own service in Afghanistan and in the forces, and the importance to him and a lot of people that he knows that have been serving our country, and people who have been around them, who appreciate people who serve. I know I'm a person who appreciates it. I know you feel the same way. So many people turn out for the ceremonies today. It means a lot to Canadians, and it means a lot to us. So we're going to do this special show. And John, we're also going to ask people to maybe check in if they go to Facebook and take a look at the group setting. You can join the group that's called Friends of the Victoria Rumble Room, Friends with a small F. And if you do that, you become much more linked into our family, where we send you all of our material every week. You're just on the regular mailing list. So we'd appreciate if people knew that. And of course, John, there's so many other ways for people to like us and follow the Rumble Room.
Absolutely. And a whole bunch of people, thank you yet again for commenting and watching the shows. Of course, Facebook is the sort of the main engine. There are 2 ways on Facebook that you can reach us, that being, of course, the main page, victoriarumbleroom.com. And then there is a news and group site in which you can post your viewpoints, the meetings that you go to. We have a Twitter site, and we have a YouTube site in which all of our videos are inventoried, and we're also on Instagram and TikTok. So please join all of them, subscribe to all of them, comment. We welcome them all the time. And I remain, as always now, your faithful servant, the Croatian sensation, the mayor of South Tulip, Johnny Jurisic.
And I'm Robin Adair. I will continue to keep the faith and rumble on.